Hello and welcome to Original Transplants, Episode 6, Take 2. My name is Sarah.
My name is Will.
And together we're the stewards of Satoyama Homestead in Warwick, Chester County, Pennsylvania. Welcome to the Original Transplants podcast, as we said, Episode 6.
Can we call it Episode 7 and call Episode 6 the lost episode?
Well, I think we just gave it away, but...
Okay.
I think for metadata purposes, we should call this episode 6.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
But perhaps we will post the lost episode so everyone can enjoy it as much as we did.
Yes.
All right. So before we get too deeply into our agenda or complaining about technology, we'd like to remind you that if you want to learn more about Satoyama Homestead, you can find your way to satoyamahs.org. That's our homestead webpage. We also have a Tumblr site where we'll be posting this episode of the podcast, episode 6, along with, within the next few days, a transcript and show notes and references. That will be at spreadcast.tumblr.com. And in addition to that, you're probably streaming our audio through our SoundCloud account. Look for us at Satoyama Homestead, and we have a set playlist for the Original Transplants podcast.
Yes.
Without further ado, we'll move into our usual agenda with an apiary update, a poultry culture update, an edible landscape update, and then our homestead chores and reviews of recent ag news. So, Will, would you like to get us started with the apiary update?
Yes. So I actually wrote down here the last time we did this, queenlessness. The one hive, the ornery hive, was struggling with some queenlessness, I believe, at least from what I could see.
And describe what you were seeing.
I can only describe it as listlessness. They were just looked lost. I mean, there was not a lot of activity. The bees looked hung out on the front porch a lot, not doing anything. They did not have a lot of foragers going out. When I opened them up, most importantly, and this is your main sign of queenlessness, is no eggs. So the queen lays an egg, and those eggs are open, and you can see them in the bottom of the little honeycombs for the first, I want to say, 4 days. And then they cap them with wax, and after that they're sealed brood. So there's two types of brood. There's eggs, open brood, and sealed brood. So if you can see open brood, it means in the last 3 to 4 days there was a queen running around inside the hive. So there's a couple reasons I wasn't sure whether it was queenlessness or not. So during the dearth, which we've talked about in previous podcasts, where there's not a lot of nectar going around, when there's not a lot of pollen going around, there's barely any flowers, the bees can sometimes pare down the size of the hive. So they'll significantly, the queen may just stop laying. And the breed I have, Carniolans, are known to be these brood cyclers, where they'll say, hey, we don't have enough resources incoming, so let's bring down the population of the hive to a manageable level where we won't eat all of our honey because we need it for the winter. They're more accustomed to being in colder climates, allegedly. I mean, the breeds, all differ within. There's sub-breeds of each. So that was like one sign where I was like, maybe they've just reduced the population a lot. Maybe the queen is still in there. But when I moved eggs from the friendly hive, which is the more active, seems way more robust. When I moved the eggs over from them, the bees in the ornery hive built cells. They built emergency supersedure cells, emergency queen cells, where they're built very haphazardly onto the side of the comb, which is how you can identify them. The other kinds of cells, swarm cells, where they're preparing, like where they know that they'll need a new queen soon, they'll build them on the bottom. These, they're built on the side, and the telltale sign, I had never seen one before. I'd only seen pictures and read text about it. It was clear to me exactly what those cells were when they were hanging off the side. So that means they were open and ready to go. So that means that the bees had raised a new queen and taken her out, and could be a new virgin queen bopping around the hive. So I've noticed over the past maybe 2 weeks now, that the bees in the ornery have been much more robust. They are sending out way more flights, and it's hard to say. Maybe that's because there's a a bloom right now, which I'll get to in a minute because I think we're coming out of the dearth just now. But yeah, they just look much better. I saw just way less like milling around, and now we had a post up on the Tumblr. You helped a lot with my fears about the hives by taking pictures. The sunlight may have been an issue, so you can see that on the Spreadcast Tumblr a little bit about the issues with sunlight hitting the hives early in the morning and waking up the girls. But so I don't know. I was optimistic. It seems like queenlessness may be coming to a close. Hopefully they'll be strong going into the winter. There is a bloom going on. There's a goldenrod out. So goldenrod is part of the aster family, and the aster family are, it seems to me, to be generally these really tall weeds. How tall would you say they are?
Some of the goldenrod are shoulder height with me. Yeah.
Yes.
3.5, 4 feet.
3.5 to 4 feet. They'll grow anywhere. Seems like they like meadows, things like that. It seems like they like Satoyama, right? Edge of the woods and the arable land. So those are coming up all over the place, and the bees love that. Now, one of the things I noticed, or I thought I caught a hint of it, was that the bees were collecting nectar from these goldenrod, which anything in the aster family, from what I understand, makes a stinky gym socks smell. So we will update everybody on the gym sock smell as we go forward. So we may have some stinky honey. So anyway, I'm interested to see what they harvest. Maybe sample a little bit of that. We'll see. I mean, it depends on. It's been kind of dry, which I feel like might actually be an advantage. It hasn't been too cloudy, so more photosynthesis going on. We might have a good fall bloom. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's great. And another thing that you've written about on the Tumblr site, spreadcast.tumblr.com, is having two hives.
Yes.
Allows you to compare and contrast the conditions between the two hives, allows you to use, is it Michael Bush's approach, bottom line up front, with, as you described, transferring a frame of brood, whether it's already capped brood or in the case of what you transferred, it was unsealed brood, which allowed them to epigenetically feed some of those eggs or some of those larvae the royal jelly to produce their super seeder queens, which you've described in the past. So, so that seems to be a really key strategy for a new beekeeper, is to invest in a second or other multiple hives. There's
a startup cost there. I mean, you're buying twice as much, but there's a very good possibility I could have lost this hive. I mean, in the summer, if they reduce the population down and then they get a disease, you could be talking about a hive wipeout. So I think we mentioned it on an earlier podcast. Summer, he actually sees a lot of beehive deaths, which is not what you'd think. You'd think over the winter they're all going to freeze to death. Well, bees actually react pretty well to the cold. They know how to deal with it. What they get sidelined or surprised by is those wild cards, like maybe maybe I smushed the queen, maybe the queen left in a swarm, maybe disease came in. I did see a very small sign of hive beetles, although I haven't seen them since, which is really, I'm really happy about. So all those different surprises can kill the queen, and then the hive has to go through a bunch of emergency procedures.
So you actually just mentioned the possibility of having accidentally smushed the queen, and I realized that in episode 6, take 1, we had a discussion about why you didn't make sure that there was no queen. Why didn't you go breaking apart the hive looking for the queen? Can you describe your philosophical stance about...
This is the part where I go, well, let me tell you about... No, so I don't look for the queen as a matter of course. I haven't seen her yet. Like, I've had two beehives. Not since the package, where I didn't want to look at her for very long because they were getting mad at me just for looking at her. So, my policy is not to dig through the hive to look for the queen. I mean, there are circumstances where you should, like, sometimes you don't like your queen and you might need to take her out. Sometimes the queen can be extremely violent and they'll just egg all the workers on to attacking anybody who even gets within 10 yards of the hive, and in which case that's not good for anybody, especially if you're in a backyard situation. it might work for an orchard or something like that, but yeah, not in this situation, not in the backyard. So there might be situations where you pull the queen out, you do the dirty deed and take her out, and then you re-queen. Although there's a good chance the bees will just kill the new queen that you introduce anyway. So my rule is don't go digging into the hive, because the more you move around the frames, I mean, they're giant pieces of wood. Each one weighs a couple of pounds, and when they're filled with honey, I mean, they're pretty heavy. They're hard to lift up with, like, your pointer finger and your thumb on each side. I mean, you can feel the strain as you're pulling them out, and they're all stuck together with propolis and everything. So you have a very good chance of smushing her, and if you do, now your hive is going to be all screwed up for the better part of a month. And in that case, you're gonna have those big investments you've put together ruined. So my main thing is don't look for the queen unless you need to.
It's don't look for the queen unless you intend on taking out the queen.
Yeah,
it's basically what you're saying, because you open yourself up to the risk of taking her out accidentally. And then you also just mentioned propolis, and you've written about that.
Yes.
In terms of your, ethical or respectful stance on hive inspections in general, that you don't go ripping frames out of supers and supers apart from supers, because they're glued together with propolis, which is the hive's community immune system.
Yes. So together, the propolis and then the dangers, like you with your big stupid hands going in and messing around in somebody else's house, of tiny insects that are pretty helpless. Yeah, that all comes together to basically say don't look for unless you need to. If you really want to learn about bee physiology and bee community and everything like that, I would recommend getting an observation hive, but we will get to that possibly in the spring. So we'll talk about that later.
To be continued.
I don't want to talk too much about that before I've done anything with it, but we'll see what happens. So that's the best way to know what the queen looks like is get yourself an observation hive, and then you can really get a good look at her, so you know what you're looking for too. Yeah. So apiary, I'm happy about it. I'm optimistic. Things seem to be going well.
Great. So we'll move on then to the poultry culture update. The main update this week is with, sorry for all the motorboat noises out there.
What's going on?
We did have a good soaking rain today, but I'm not sure what that was. The main update this week is with their diet. We've talked about our husk tomatoes or ground cherries that are growing out in the no-mow lawn in the permaculture edible landscape. The chickens have also discovered the husk tomatoes. And ideally, the husk tomatoes would be allowed to drop off the plant. That signals that they're nearly ripe, and then they fully ripen off the plant in the husk.
Yeah.
So when you're harvesting them, you want to pick them up off the ground, leave them on the counter in their paper husk for a couple of days, and then look for a darkening and sort of oranging of their yellow tone. They should progress from a greenish yellow when they drop off the plant to a real orangey yellow, and that's how you know they're good and ripe. But the chickens don't have that patience, so they're plucking them directly off the plant.
Green.
Practically green, and then they, rip apart the husk into the husk tomato itself, the ground cherry, and eat it all up. So they're enjoying the husk tomatoes.
I think I brought this up on the last time we did this. Do you want to talk about what those husk tomatoes taste like really quick? Like why the chickens might like them?
Sure, yeah. The husk tomatoes are sweet. I mean, they're related to the tomato. They're in the nightshade family. But they're called ground cherries for a reason. They have a really nice, sweet flavor. And the tomatoes, the chickens have a sweet tooth, and I have a sweet tooth. As you've heard previously, they really enjoy berries as a treat: strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, pretty much any berries. And once they discovered our cultivated raspberry bramble, they were pulling the berries right off the cane as well. So Yes, all the ladies, the bees, the chickens, and Sarah here at Satoyama Homestead have a sweet tooth.
Did you hear me say the bees were also on the husk tomatoes? After the chickens pulled them down, then the bees would jump on them. I saw a couple carnies in there.
Really?
Yeah.
Taking the juice of the ground cherry itself.
So we have a very virtuous cycle going on here.
Yeah, and we're hoping that it means that we'll have volunteer husk tomatoes again next year.
Yeah, that'll be awesome.
So that's been an added component to their diet. And the other thing that I did this week is we're getting kind of low on their chick scratch, their chick grit that they eat. So I went to the feed store, unsolicited endorsement for Nestle's Feed and Hardware over in Morgantown.
Yes.
And picked up some layer pellets, I believe they're called, layer scratch. So as we, I think, discussed in take one, layer pellets will typically have higher calcium content for them to form the shells of the eggs, as well as higher protein content, because as we know, eggs nutritionally, dietarily speaking, are very high in protein. So that needs to be an added part of the pullet's diet in order for them to successfully, healthfully, safely lay eggs. And then probably as we move into the winter, so I think last time we tried to record the podcast, we talked about some of the signs of fall that we're seeing, and maybe we can mention what we're seeing with the Tupelo black gum trees. But as we get into the colder months and their laying slows down, and they'll probably have a molt where they shed their feathers and kind of everything starts over, that would be a good time to switch them to a more high carb diet or a high carb pellet scratch, because they need the extra carbohydrates to burn just to stay warm. I mean, chickens, it's breed dependent, but many of them, generally speaking as a species, are cold hardy, but it does burn a lot of calories for them to stay warm.
What does cold hardy mean?
It means they can withstand low, near freezing temperatures outside with adequate protection. I mean, you need to keep them sheltered. You want to keep them reasonably out of the wind. You do need to be careful with roosters in particular. They can get frostbite on their combs and their wattles because they tend not to sleep with their faces tucked under a wing as hens do. But generally speaking, chickens as a species are cold hardy, and then there are breeds which are more, developed in certain geographic locations which are more or less cold hardy. So that's a long way of saying it while talking about their diet, that once we get into the colder months, once we see that the laying has really slowed down due to the reduction in sunlight, once we see signs of molting, that kind of thing, it's probably a good time to switch them to a higher carb diet to help them maintain weight while they burn energy staying warm over the winter.
How big was that bag you bought?
It's a 40-pound bag.
Wow.
So the last 40-pound bag lasted probably 8 to 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
I would say most of May, June and July. We're now midway through August. So yeah, and I mean, the fact that they get to free range throughout the yard most of the time helps a lot. The fact that we supplement with kitchen trimmings and leftovers helps a lot. During the winter when there's not as many bugs out, when there's not as much green forage, when there's snowpack on the ground and they're not able to forage, then we'll have to feed them more store-bought rations.
No toads.
When there's no toads, for mayapple to eat.
For mayapple to
eat.
Yeah, sorry,
exactly.
Toad.
I think that was a story we told in take one. Actually, you told because I didn't witness it.
Yeah, toads, cicadas.
Our black Australorpida. Yeah, beneficial species, a little toad.
Yeah.
She's been our gregarious eater from day one.
Yeah, she'll eat anything. You put anything in front of her.
And I also forgot, since this is take two, this is actually a new story, and it's new to you.
New story,
Yeah. So we've talked before about how the chickens have crossed the road, gone to the dark side. So today, as I said, we were getting a nice soaking rain, so I was doing some work inside. I'm looking forward to when we get, talk about homestead chores, hand pulling that stilt grass tomorrow once the ground will be nice and wet.
Yeah.
But I had just checked on them maybe half an hour to 45 minutes prior, and I just got this sense like I haven't heard them. You know what I heard? I think I heard a crow crowing or a blue jay calling, and I just got this bad juju, and I was like, I need to go look for the chickens. And I go out and they're gone. No trace of them. No sound of them. Like, they're not just across the street in the neighbor's driveway. They're nowhere to be seen whatsoever. So I raced back into the house. I changed into like jeans and shoes in case I needed to go like diving around in the bush looking for them. I grabbed my keys, locked up the house, grabbed some of their scratch in their feed container. I also took our garden basket out, harvested a couple of tomatoes and husk tomatoes to try to like lure them because they love my harvest basket. And I'm going around and I'm calling them. I, circle basically the perimeter of the homestead, looking at all their usual haunts. I get to the point really where I'm looking for piles of feathers. I'm like, something dragged them off to its lair. I went straight there. I'm looking across the street. I'm like wondering how much my neighbor would actually mind if I went into his backyard to see if they were back there. I'm doing like wider and wider concentric rings like around our property and up and down the road. And then I'm like completing a circuit. I'm over by the burning bush and I hear one of them, clucking, and I hear the pitter patter of 8 little feet hitting the road. And here they come running back across the road up our gravel driveway, right up to the burning bush, right up to the harvest basket. Like, yeah, that's what you do for us. You bring us food, They hadn't
crossed the road in like 2 weeks.
They had been pretty good, yeah. And I mean, they were like, I don't know where they went. They were not visible. They weren't visible from the road.
Because then I came home from work and they were gone. They had gone across the road again.
Yeah.
We had to chase them back. This better not become a habit, I'm telling you.
I know, it was very stressful.
Yeah.
So, that was stressful. The only thing keeping me optimistic was the fact that I hadn't found a big pile of feathers and that I hadn't heard a big commotion.
Anything, yeah.
But honestly, like, I was thinking, back to Team Baby Bird and how the Mockingbird Mama and I would team up on the black rat snake. If it hadn't been for hearing the calling of that crow or that jay and being like, that sounds kind of distressed or just not happy,
Satoyama.
Yeah, I was like, I need to go investigate. So
wow,
birds for the win.
Yeah, the birds.
So yeah,
except our birds.
They're just spoiled because instead of like punishing them and making them go back in the coop, I just was like so happy to see them that I was like, here's everything in my harvest basket, and here's your entire
rewarded bad behavior.
Yes, here's your entire container of chick grit to eat.
No wonder then they cross the street again.
Yeah, they're looking for handouts. So that's the poultry culture update. They're actually doing pretty good. The other exploration they experienced between take 1 and take 2 is they actually climbed up the stairs to the deck yesterday. And then it was like, okay, now how do we get them down?
Right. They're just going to take little chicken droppings all over the place.
Yeah. But they were, I think, enjoying hanging around, except it was hilarious. There was nothing for them to eat or peck around at, and they were walking very gingerly on the deck boards. Like, they really were exaggerating their steps, it seemed like.
They didn't know how to handle it,
And they're stained, so they're a little slippery or whatever, stained and sealed, so they've been a constant source of entertainment, both tragedy and comedy over the past
Mere
week.
Tragedy, that's for sure.
Yeah, which I believe brings us into the edible landscape.
Yeah. So the first thing we had on here was the garlic bulbils.
Yeah, so we had talked about bulbils. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, I will admit. It's bulbils, and I'll link to some resources about the bulbils. But we had talked about growing garlic, how it adapts to your micro environment, which is very cool.
Yeah.
Over a few generations of digging up heads, splitting off cloves, replanting the best cloves, and eating the rest. The other thing that we've talked about earlier in the podcast was garlic scapes, and how I believe they come in around June or so. These are the equivalent of the flower. I don't think botanically, technically speaking, they're actually flowers. I'll have to look more into that. But they're essentially a reproductive component of the plant, which you can eat in a young form, and then once it gets to a certain point of development, it's really no longer palatable. But what you can do at that point is let it reach full maturity, and then it develops these little micro cloves that are called bulbils.
Right.
And you can actually save and plant those.
Do you want to describe what they look like?
It looks like...
to me, they look like mini garlic cloves.
Yeah, that's kind of what I said, a micro clove.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's been
real
described.
Tiny. Yeah.
So I harvested a bunch of those, definitely in the high tens, possibly, more than 100 of those. From the ones that we had let develop. And my plan is, because garlic is supposed to be one of those plants that gives off a scent that detracts a lot of pest critters, in particular burrowing rodents, I'm going to plant the bulbils, which will take a few years to develop into a mature enough head that you would harvest it, and plant them around the Jerusalem artichokes, or the sunchokes. Because last season into early this season, when we were hoping to be able to harvest our first crop of sunchoke tubers, we realized that a lot of them had been eaten up, nibbled up by burrowing rodents. So I'm hoping that by protecting our surviving Jerusalem artichoke stands with the garlic bulbils, that while we won't necessarily be able to have a garlic harvest from those plantings next year, they may serve to protect the sunchokes.
Cool. So I wonder if it's like does the like mole or vole like run into it and it stinks, and I think
they might be able to smell it.
Like just
have a sense of smell within the soil structure.
Because I love garlic. I'll eat it raw.
Yeah, it's good. So that's kind of a cool companion planting permaculture edible landscape update.
Very cool.
What else we got on there?
You have like a fungus
among us.
Fungus twofer. Here, first the bad news about the pumpkin squash.
Yeah, so
pumpkin squash.
We described, I guess, late June, early July as being sort of a monsoonal period here. We were getting a lot of frequent heavy rain. And actually, in talking to our neighbor who's a farmer, he was having issues with his pumpkin patch and fungus in his pumpkin patch that he had to treat. So I came back to our little squash patch that we have outside of the kitchen garden enclosure, in an area where the soil didn't really seem to be healthy. It seemed to dry out very easily. There wasn't a lot of plant life growing there. It was kind of a scrubby area. So the idea this year was, let's put some squash plants in there, because you get lots of nice living mulch coverage for the soil to retain moisture, moderate soil temperature, revitalize beneficial communities within the soil, earthworms and other kind of critters like that. And then, assuming all goes well with the squash plants, mulch them directly into the soil, so you have this nice compost that's immediately available at the end of the season.
Got it.
Except that I also noticed that we seem to have a fungus. On particularly the pumpkin. It didn't seem to impact as much the summer squash plants or the buttercup squash. But the pumpkin, I was definitely noticing that the immature pumpkin fruits were dropping off the vine and were kind of rotten from the inside out. I looked for signs of squash vine borer, but that's not what was going on. That's pretty clear because the stem close to the ground will start to die back, and it'll actually start to smell as the squash vine borer grub moves through the stem and ingests it and kills back the plant. They are nasty critters. We had problems with those in our first garden. Yeah. So no signs of that, but definitely signs of, I guess, what they call like rusting or blotching on the leaves. They would turn yellow and then sort of brownish black and then crispy. So you have some options. You can apply antifungal products, or I'm trying to control and remove the affected foliage and let the plants regenerate. Now that, we did have a nice rain today, but we actually really needed it. We went into a drier spell toward the end of July and beginning of August. So,
and it looks like we have another drier spell in front of us for like a week.
Okay.
They're talking about no rain.
Dry and sunny.
So it may hopefully dry out the rest of the fungus.
Yeah. And the reason I decided not to use an antifungal product is related to our second fungus-related update. But it's really because we've talked previously on the podcast about the mycorrhizal network, which is a network of symbiotic fungi that live among the roots of plants and help plants, in academic terms, send signals, in Satoyama terms, communicate, because as I posed the question in take one of this episode, what's the difference? And also, actually, research is showing share resources, share nutrients from plant to plant across this network in the soil. So if you're applying foliar applications of antifungal product and then you have a rain, chances are very high that you're going to end up with that antifungal in your soil community. And that you're going to negatively impact your mycorrhizal network. So that's why I'm trying this sort of defoliation approach of removing the impacted leaves. It's obviously more labor intensive, and I might unknowingly be contributing to the dispersion of spores of the fungus. I actually don't know because I'm disturbing the leaves. But I'm just going to see if it works. You know? And we do seem to have some pumpkins maturing on the vine. So they do seem to have recovered, and possibly that was strictly meteorological.
Am I right in thinking that the pumpkin vine puts down roots further out from the vine?
I think it does. I think where it touches the ground, it could put down roots.
It can put down some roots.
Yeah.
Because I noticed
I have seen that.
The end of it, the other end of the vine from, the main root was really turning yellow. All those leaves around there were turning yellow. But then you look further down the root, and it was almost like they were still separated because they had their own root system. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, that's one possibility. The other possibility is just that the growth end of the plant is where you have the meristem, where you literally have the new growth, where the plant is investing all of its resources and all of its energy.
I see.
So it's natural for there to be dieback at the older part of the plant and an investment in renewal and growth in the growing tip, they say, of the plant.
That makes sense. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it could be both.
But
so while we were talking about, I got it, mycorrhizal network, the other thing that I wanted to mention that came up between take 1 and take 2 is a citizen science project called the Forest Fungi Project. You can find them at forestfungi.org, forestfungi.org. And what they're doing is they're training citizen scientists, folks like you and me, to collect samples, identify trees in a forest, take photographs of the area of the tree, and collect soil samples, leaf samples, root samples, and send it to their lab so that we can better understand mycorrhizal networks and how they operate in the forest. And one of the foci of their research, which you can, again, find out more about at forestfungiproject.org, is they're looking to be able to understand the impact of climate change, of changing temperatures and water availability on forests, because forests are very old living communities and they're used to having things a certain way. So as climate change results in changes to ambient temperature, changes to available water and humidity and the water cycle, changes to other species in the ecosystem, one of the ways they're looking to study that and understand that is by examining the mycorrhizal network.
Okay.
So you can contribute to this research project, again, by going to their site, forestfungiproject.org, and looking at the things that you need to do in order to properly identify the tree and the forest that you're working in, take the photographs that they need, and collect the samples of tissue that they need.
They also have some sweet pictures of underground fungus.
Yeah.
Which are really cool looking.
Yeah. And so we'll link to their site and also some additional resources about the mycorrhizal network, which we've talked about before.
Great. So you also made some jam recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in episode 5, we featured our guest host, Luke, my younger brother. And while he was here hanging out at the homestead with us, we did multiple batches of jam. Yeah, for better or worse. Our first batch was wild blackberry.
Better.
And it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything went right. Our second batch was with wild wine berries, and I think I made a miscalculation in the recipe, so I will take the blame for that one. In terms of the amount of berries that we needed to put in and or adjusting the amount of sugar that we put in relative to the amount of berries we had. So that batch actually kind of burned.
Yeah.
And in the bread machine. And so what we ended up doing was straining out the seeds and the berry pulp and pouring out dollops of the resulting syrup onto some wax paper and refrigerating it. So we ended up with kind of a hard taffy candy out of that batch. I actually just had a piece. It's good.
So better. Yeah.
So okay. Yeah. The third batch was wineberry take 2. And that one, I again made a miscalculation, an error in judgment with respect to how much pectin I needed to put in. Turns out pectin, both in terms of its quality and its accurate measurement, is very key to getting the correct consistency of your jam or your spread. So I think one of the issues I've been facing in general with the jellies this year is that my pectin's a year old. It looked like there was a little bit of humidity possibly in the container. It was a little bit clumped up. So I'm not sure if the quality's there.
Yeah.
And then again, I was trying out a different recipe with the wine berries, made some misjudgments in calculations, and so that turned out to be more of a syrup. Exactly. Which is good. We've actually had it on sourdough waffles.
Yeah,
it was tasty. We were talking about mixing it into tea or mixing it to, soda water, that kind of thing.
We had it on sourdough bread, too.
Yeah, that's true. We spread it on the bread.
I mean, basically, better. Okay, better, not worse. I mean, like at this point, you got jam, candy, and syrup.
Nothing goes to waste. That's Satoyama. That's key.
It's not bad.
And our last batch, our tried and true old standby, was strawberry, and that turned out really, really good.
Yeah.
And for, I guess, to be completely accurate, so we did strain out the fruit pulp and the seeds with a jelly straining kit and kind of jar up the jelly for Luke, and then I just hold on to the fruit pulp and the seeds for us because you can still spread it, and the seeds don't really bother me as much. I know people have preferences or diverticulitis, you can't have berry seeds and things like that, but so we have quite a few spreads.
Tasty. So you also did some dehydrating of some of the garden harvests.
Yeah, so we had collards, green beans, and tomatoes that were kind of needed to be used up one way or the other.
Yeah.
And because it's been a little bit on the hot side, I didn't really feel up to canning. There's other differences that we talked about in take one between dehydrating and canning. But basically we have, in addition to the solar dehydrator that you built that I use with fresh herbs, we have an electric dehydrator and jerky maker. And so I just wash everything, slice everything down to sort of equal sizes, arrange it in the dehydrator trays, set it and forget it. The benefits of dehydrating foods for preservation, one is it's a really old technique. It for sure predates water bath canning, because in a pinch you could literally just slice down some game into very thin slivers of meat and lay those out on a rock in the sun and let them dry, let the water evaporate out of them, and they would be preserved for a reasonable survival period of time, right? So dehydrating is an old technique. It's removing moisture from the food to prevent spoilage, bacteria, and fungal growth. So, but it maintains the nutrients of the food in a way that water bath canning and canning in general, because you're adding liquids to the food, putting the foods in liquids, a lot of their nutrients will leach out into the liquids, and most people aren't going to use that because you're talking about like vinegars and other very highly acidic liquids. So there's, you're probably not going to drink the pickle juice, right? So you do have some nutrient loss in canning. Also, in terms of the texture of the food, sometimes reconstituting dehydrated foods actually gives you a more palatable, mouthfeel than canning, as we had the experience with the pickles where I used cucumbers that were really probably overripe. With canning, you sometimes lose the crisp texture that fresh produce has. So there's some benefits and drawbacks. One other one that I'll mention and then we can move on is with dehydrating, because you're removing water, you're reducing the size of the food, so size reduction in terms of storage is always good, and you're reducing the weight of the food. So we've talked in the past about how we've used dehydrated meals, dehydrated leftovers as meals ready to eat for backpacking trips.
Yep, they stay forever.
It keeps forever. You can vacuum seal it in plastic, vacuum sealing plastic, and then the weight of it's, you're talking about ounces as opposed to, you can get to pounds with, half gallon or quart size canning jars full of liquid and vegetables or whatever you have in them. So
you have a post on the Spreadcast blog with some information about your dehydrator, some pictures if people want to see what it looks like.
In that project I was actually dehydrating some herbs and some flowers. But exactly.
Yeah, so whatever you want to dehydrate, it's pretty much fair game. If you do it right, it'll stay for a very long time.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Stay tasty too. We did lose some cabbages, I suppose, to cabbage moths.
Yes, I'm kind of lazy with the integrated pest management approach to managing things like cabbage moths. If you're not out there hand picking them every day, and if you're not spraying, then you're going to get them. The cabbage moths lay their eggs on the undersides of the leaves of your cabbage plants, cabbage family plants, broccoli, some on the kale, kohlrabi, obviously the cabbages, which is what we're talking about. And then the worms hatch from the eggs, and they're just chowing down on your leafy greens. So I did have to pull a couple of the winter first Savoy cabbages. I just pulled them up completely. They were so infested, there was no way we were going to be able to eat them. They don't seem to go after the red cabbage as much, so I'm pretty happy about that because I like to make a good slaw out of red cabbage.
Yeah.
So we still have a couple of those in. And then I really defoliated the kale, the collards, and the broccoli, hoping that the plants will regenerate leafy growth at the same time that the cabbage moths are kind of waning out of the picture and no longer laying. So that's the plan there. It's kind of, it's late to have cabbage in anyway, all those cabbage plants, and so you end up with pest issues. The reason I keep a lot of them in the ground is, well, the kale, the collards, those will come back in the fall and then overwinter. The broccoli one of them is flowering, which means I can collect seeds. The other is actually a variety that continues to put up small heads of broccoli as you harvest them. So it's still heading. And then the cabbage is kind of out of laziness, and it's like my preference, even though it doesn't always work in my favor, is to leave stuff in the ground until I'm ready to use it.
Yeah.
So that's why the red cabbage heads are still in the ground, but we're getting through it.
Yeah, and you'll be doing some more planting.
Yeah, I'm a little behind on my fall transplants planting schedule, but and I'd like to catch up with doing some succession planting with the beans. But exactly, I'm definitely thinking of starting some transplants for fall weather and overwintering crops, especially collards, kale, as we just mentioned, the cabbages and the broccoli, and maybe some kohlrabi again.
Great. So yeah, we also did. We've been getting rid of some raspberries lately.
Yeah, so that will take us more into the homestead chores. But exactly, there was an area of grass near our cultivated raspberry bramble, which I've come to think of as kind of a meditation walk of berries. And I was siphoning it down in the no-mow lawn, and I was looking around at the mulched paths next to the raspberry bramble and seeing how there were a number of raspberry runners coming up under the path. And I was like, I think it's time to start transplanting these and create some more arcs in our little meditation walk here. So that's exactly what I did. I scythed down the grass until it was really short. Then I went over it multiple times with the reel mower to get it really nice and short. I dug all my starter holes. I think I did about a dozen with the spade. And I would say I dug 6 to 8 inch deep and wide holes to put these rhizomes in. And then I gently dug up the raspberries, making sure that you get the root and separate the runners from the mother plant, and transplanted them into the holes, made sure they were watered really well, because it was kind of hot and dry when I did this. And we have seen some drooping and wilting, but I really think that, the tops of the plants might die back, but they're going to be sending out runners from the sides without a problem.
Maybe you can say how rhizomes work, because I realized I was talking with somebody about raspberries and them saying, they said to me, hey, can I get some raspberries? And I said, well, yeah, we just take off the main clump of the raspberries. What exactly happens when the raspberry is spreading? Yeah,
I mean, this is one of their methods of propagation, so of reproducing their plant. Mm-hmm. So it's when they send out a root runner, essentially, under the surface of the soil, and that root runner will send up a new stalk, a new cane of raspberry plant. Right. And it'll continue, laterally to send out runners, which will send up plants, and then they'll send out runners and send up plants. And then obviously the other way that raspberries can propagate is by seed. The complicated thing there is, my understanding is the seeds have to actually pass through the gut of a bird.
Yeah.
In order for there to be kind of a scarification or a partial digestion of the seed shell, the seed casing.
Yeah.
And then they're able to germinate and plant. So it's kind of cool because we've got 4 designated berry processors on the property.
We are going to have a lot of raspberries.
So we could potentially have a lot of berries next year.
I think we are, yeah.
But I don't see that as a bad thing. I mean, that's permaculture, right? That's working with the resources that you're gifted in your location. And berries are delicious and nutritious.
So once you take that rhizome, once you separate it from the mother plant, it'll grow on its own, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I think raspberries root very readily.
Yeah.
I really, like I said, I'm not worried about these ones that we transplanted. They look like heck right now, but I really think they're going to bounce right back.
I think with this rain we just got, they're going to do good.
And I didn't mention in this take that we also mulched them really well. We still have some leaves left over from last fall, so we put down a nice thick layer of fall leaves, and on top of that we mulched with the grass clippings from the scything. So we've got 12 to 18 inch long grass clippings, basically straw or hay that we put down on top of the leaves to hold them down. And then we had this nice rain last night into this morning, so they should be doing good.
We're gonna have a lot of berries.
Definitely.
And
also, sorry to interrupt you, not only more berries, but also less turf grass to manage next year, which was really the whole motivation. We're basically, I mean, we haven't talked about it on the podcast, but we were walking around the property today, kind of looking at the blackberries, speaking of listlessly, kind of looking at them like, oh my gosh, there's going to be another crop to harvest in not too long. And I've been very lax about it because we've got gallon bags of them frozen up. We've got husk tomatoes coming in. I definitely want to go out and buy some peaches to make sure we can enjoy some peaches this season.
You have to live your life. You can't just pick all the berries.
Exactly.
We learned that.
Like Thoreau said, you can either write about your life or live it. You can either pick the berries or you can eat the berries. You don't have time for both anymore.
Yeah.
So it's a good problem to have. that sounds a little ridiculous, but but it will be simply less turf grass to manage next year.
Tell you what, with the chickens drop all over the yard, we're gonna have some weeding of berries to do next year. I think it's what we're gonna have to do. Like they're gonna be coming up all over the place. Is my prediction.
We'll just scythe them down.
Yeah, we'll take them out. Be all good. So we had on household chores, homestead chores, the firewood. So I'll talk about that a little. So we did get a lot of our firewood this year from a helpful neighbor, and we tried to source it locally within the county because we're under the quarantine where you bring dead wood. When you cut down a tree, it's usually because it has a problem with it. So you're talking about diseased trees, and bringing those county to county or state to state even is going to cause a lot of problems for the native trees. So we got some locally sourced lumber, and we also locally sourced out of our own backyard some of our lumber and
firewood.
Yes, firewood. Sorry, and we're trying to do a couple different methods of stacking them. So we tried some Amish stacking, so-called Amish stacking, which is a circular method where the timber stood up on its end, and the rain is supposed to sluice off of it that way. You cover it with some bark, and allegedly it will cure much better and prevent mice from living in it, which is a problem we've had a lot. And when your mice are living in your firewood and you're carrying your firewood into your house, you're talking about having mouse droppings all over the place, and these mice carry all kinds of diseases, not to mention bugs, snakes.
I was going to say, they also attract snakes.
I've seen birds going in and out of the wood piles. We tried another one, the log cabin stacking, which is sort of stacking them perpendicular to each other instead of the traditional stacking, which is our last stack, which is all pointing the same direction, and you stack it like a cord, 4 by 4 by 8, and usually your firewood's about 18 inches long, 20 inches long, depending on the size of your wood stove. So we'll put up some pictures. We're running very scientific experiment in our
very
backyard.
Empirical, very objective.
We very much made sure that all controls were in place before we attempted this trial, but yeah, we'll see what it looks like. I'm really interested to try out our firewood this year.
It's certainly visually interesting, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's a conversation piece, I guess. But yeah, and we have, how many cords do you think? Probably 4 to 5.
I would say, I would be conservative and say 4.
Say 4. So last year was pretty cold and snowy, and we burned about 4. Although we were running out towards the end. So we may still need some. We'll see what the winter looks like.
Well, and I think we talked in take 1 about the autumnal seasonal changes we've been noticing in terms of, we've both already noticed that we're seeing shorter periods of sunlight during the day. You know, coming up later. It's setting earlier. We've also made an observation about the leaves changing on the black gum or tupelo trees.
Yep.
And you were sharing a sort of plain folk wisdom.
Piece of wisdom, that if the leaves are changing on the sides of the tree rather than from the crown down, so if you just see little splotches of color on the sides of the trees, it means it's going to be a colder winter.
And what have we been seeing?
We've been seeing exactly that. And we've had 2 cold winters in a row, so let's go for the hat trick. And
trifecta.
Yeah, so we may have a cold winter, but we got wood. I'm feeling pretty good about it. We'll see how the chickens do, and yeah, we'll be. I think we're prepared in terms of firewood for this winter. I'm feeling like we are. I'm gonna get on the roof, clean out the chimney, and we'll be all set to start burning.
Great.
Yeah. And then the last homestead chore we had on here was the stilt grass. And
yes, so as we've said, we had some rain last night into this morning. I'm not sure if we said in episode... I think we said in episode 5, actually, so you've heard, if you're a regular listener to Original Transplants, that after a good soaking rain is a great time to weed because the soil's nice and loosened up, the roots are nice and loosened up, they're kind of, resting on their laurels right up at the surface of the soil.
So you get them when they're least expecting it.
Exactly, so it's a great time to do hand pulling of weeds. Stilt grass, as we described, is an invasive that can really crowd and shade out your local natives.
Yeah.
It also, I was reading, puts foraging pressure on natives because it's not good forage for deer and other herbivores in the forest. So it's bad news. So I'll be trying to take out some of our stilt grass tomorrow.
Yeah, by the
my
roots.
to-do list.
I tried out using the scythe, which is pretty easy to cut it down. I mean, that's the one thing about it is you kick at it, it just completely folds under the pressure. But I cut some of it down with the scythe, which seemed to slow it down. So our hope is we take out as many of them as we can because we're not going to get all of it.
You want to prevent it from flowering. It is an annual, so if you can prevent flowering and seed maturation and germination, then you can control the spread.
Next year, it'll slow down.
The reason I'm not willing to scythe it everywhere is, as we've described previously, it's interseeded with certainly Asian dayflower, and there's another sort of grassy wildflower that it's interseeded with a pink one that I haven't identified, as well as some, I think is oxalis or wood sorrel. So there's flowers that are beneficial to pollinators that are intermixed with the stilt grass in a lot of areas. So that's why I'm turning to hand pulling as opposed to scything.
Yeah. So that takes us to the news.
All right. So out of homestead chores into ag news. So we haven't said that this is Tuesday, August 11th. Again, we had some technical difficulties. This is take 2 of episode 6. We'll be still reading from the Saturday, August 8th edition of Lancaster Farming. And our first feature article comes from Section A, page 1, written by our friend and staff writer, Philip Gruber. And the headline of this article is Study Calculates Farm's Value to Environment. So I'm just going to quote a couple of sections from the article here. Quote, agricultural land recharges groundwater, buffers against flooding, provides pollinator habitat, and improves air quality, among other things. Those ecosystem services in Lancaster County are worth an estimated $480 million a year, about as much as the county's largest ag sector, poultry and eggs. That finding comes from a report being published today by Earth Economics, a Tacoma, Washington nonprofit specializing in natural capital valuation. Further down in the article, quoting, natural assets like soil and water can be valued with the same techniques used for traditional capital, like buildings, bridges, and machinery, but the two categories are not quite the same. Man-made assets lose value over time, but renewable ecosystems do not necessarily depreciate.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think that final reflection regarding assets and value over time is really interesting, especially since we've taken a very permaculture-influenced philosophy to land and natural resource management here at Satoyama. Really, almost all of our inputs are outputs from the homestead. I mean, with a few exceptions, one notable one being like the chick pellets, for instance. The chicken scratch that we use to supplement their forage, which I would say is at this point a primary component in their diet. And it's a goal to be able to produce on site our own chicken feed. That would be a great long-term endeavor.
Yeah.
But really, when you invest work and local natural, sourced locally resources in the land, then you see that investment manifested the next season, and you've got what we call a virtuous cycle going between, locally or on-site sourced inputs and the outputs that you get in terms of whether it's beauty, if that's, if ornamental is your focus, or whether it's the things that you can eat that you can produce from the land, or whether it's the positivity of the experience that you have working the land. It's all good. So I definitely think it's interesting that there's now an entire market built around valuing undeveloped and agricultural land as a natural asset that you can assign a dollar figure and a long-term amortization of value to. So that's sort of just interesting.
Definitely.
Can you give me the page number for our next feature article?
A16.
Flipping over to A16. Oh yeah, this is cool. The headline here is Seeds of Change, a farm grows in Chester. This is written by Caitlin McCabe from the Philadelphia Inquirer and comes to us through the Associated Press. So again, I'm going to quote from the article here. For more than a decade, the acre at the back of the Ruth L. Bennett homes on Chester's west side sat vacant, overgrown and untouched, flanked by public housing on either side. But new life has sprouted at the site, and the once forsaken parcel has joined a growing urban farm movement nationwide. In 2008, the Chester Housing Authority, the Delaware County City's public housing agency, had an idea. Since many residents did not have the space to plant their own gardens, the authority would revitalize the acre for them, building an urban farm. Over the years, the farm expanded slowly. Just a handful of trees, some garden beds, and a few crops planted sporadically, until this year. This spring, Terrence Topping Brown of Upper Darby Township took the reins and, alongside students from Swarthmore College, bolstered the farm's offerings within months. Now more than 70 raised garden beds sit on the land, yielding more than 20 different crops, a sweeping variety of everything from cucumbers to kale to sweet potatoes. The open land is critical for Chester, the impoverished city along the Delaware River that for 12 of the last 15 years was deemed a food desert by the USDA. Today, only one supermarket operates in the city of 34,000, and in a town where 1/3 of residents live below the poverty line, many of whom do not have access to a car. Obtaining healthy local food is vital. So we really just wanted to give an unsolicited endorsement and shout out to Terrence Topping Brown of the Urban Tree Connection in Philadelphia, which is an organization that promotes and helps build urban farm initiatives. And we just wanted to wish everybody, at the Ruth L. Bennett Homes Garden, great luck with developing the garden and enjoying their harvest. And again, there's a lot of news coming out now about an urban farming movement. And it just makes sense when you have cities that have been economically impacted, where you've seen either a loss of industry or some other loss of economic opportunities, where you see a lot of lot vacancy, a lot of absentee landownerism, property ownerism, to be able to use those properties for a positive purpose, to provide a positive experience of working the land for people, which is very renewing and renews wellness, to provide fresh, locally produced food for people, to help people understand food production and how food comes to market and comes to be available to eat. It's all good things. And the rest of this article talks a lot about how Terrence Topping Brown is working with kids to help kids understand gardening, farming, the life cycle of plants, and nutrition.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah, it's really inspiring.
It plays into something you've mentioned on the podcast before about how there's a general movement, towards, and you mentioned the urban movement, but in general, just movement towards people wanting to understand where their food is. And you've mentioned that on almost every podcast.
Yeah.
You've been able to point to some example of it. This is just another one.
Exactly. And I think, we've talked before about whether plants need to have their roots in the soil in order to maximize their health. And I think people like to have their hands in the soil and their feet on the ground and like to have the experience of working with the earth. I mean, we're a product of the earth. So allowing kids to have this opportunity, and people who are living in the homes as part of the Chester Housing Authority have this opportunity of an interaction and engagement, a relationship and intimacy with land when they may not own their own land, when they may be living in an apartment that's many floors up from the ground.
Yeah.
I think it's just a very positive thing for the community and for the people as well, above and beyond the fact that their nutrition will improve, their access to food will improve, the site, the aesthetic site of the lot's going to improve. It's all positive. It's definitely the virtuous cycle in action.
Hey, I'm excited for them.
Yeah, so best of luck over there. And I think you had an article to wrap us up.
One last article. This one's kind of just fun. This is from American Forests magazine, and it is from their series Best of American Forests. The name of the article is "The Trees That Missed the Mammoths," and this is by Whit Bronaugh. You can find this online. Look for "The Trees That Missed the Mammoths." It's got some great pictures, so you might want to take a look. So the article claims you can see ghosts if you look at certain plants in the environment, certain native plants. A lot of the article focuses on the Osage orange and ecological anachronisms, of which that orange is one of them. So an anachronism, if you don't know the definition of the word, is something that's chronologically out of place, like a cell phone in the 1960s or a payphone today, right? Mm-hmm. So it's something from a different time. So the idea here is that there are certain plants all over North America that are ecological anachronisms. One of those plants is our beloved tiny pawpaws that are out in our pineum.
In the edible landscape.
Yes. So we've been trying to grow pawpaws for 2 years now. We finally, I think we got some...
we have some seedlings established, but they're youngins for sure. They're
youngins, and we're very excited to have them because pawpaws put out what is known as one of the biggest fruits in North America. It'll fit in the palm, fit in your whole fist. It apparently tastes like something between a banana and a mango, and it will grow in Pennsylvania. I hear it grows big time in Virginia, and that it's just in terms of the mid-Atlantic climate, it loves it out here.
I was gonna say, from what I remember, it will tolerate dappled shade or partial shade. It likes moist and acidic soil, moist and acidic soil profiles.
So. That, along with the persimmon, which we also have persimmon trees, are fruits that and fruits that are native to this area but aren't seen a lot anymore. And the argument in this article goes that these trees evolved large fruits that could be eaten by large mammals like mammoths or ground sloths or the short-faced bear.
Yeah.
These giant mammals that were prehistoric that have been extinct for some time, and that these plants are still putting out these big fruits, hoping that the large animals will eat them, process them in their stomach, and then drop the seeds behind them as they walk along.
Portable compost.
So one of the problems with, say, a squirrel eating a pawpaw is that the squirrel then cracks the seeds open, ruins the embryo, and it can't grow. A mammoth, on the other hand, will probably eat like a dozen pawpaws, and just inhale them without even thinking. I mean, I'm projecting onto a mammoth, but I'm assuming that they're eating several tons of veggies and fruits every day, so they're not eating the seeds the same way. They're dropping them behind them. So the pawpaw is kind of this interesting plant that it doesn't exactly belong in our current ecosystem unless we bring back mammoths or even some of the other large mammals, which doesn't look like that's happening anytime soon.
Right.
So one of the things I'm thinking about long term is what happens to things like the pawpaw and the persimmon. Without human intervention there, those plants will just sort of go extinct, right? I assume.
One thing that's interesting about both of them is they'll also, as we were discussing with the raspberries, they'll also sucker.
Yes.
So you'll end up with a stand of pawpaw, a stand of persimmon. However, the drawback there is you're talking about genetically identical plants.
Right.
You don't have genetic diversity. You don't have cross-pollination of seeds, which means you have increasing susceptibility to disease.
Yes.
And increasing susceptibility to other problems when, everything is genetically homogeneous.
Fungus, whatever.
Yeah.
They might just taste good to something that'll eat all the foliage off. So anyway, the pawpaw is in this interesting group, along with a whole host of other interesting plants across North America, of anachronistic fruits. So yeah, you can read it. It's the trees that miss the mammoths, and yeah, they've got some interesting plants in there, like the honey locust tree, that has giant spines on it to keep the mammoths from eating it. So very cool article. And yeah, we have a little bit of mammoth chow in the
Growing in the
yard.
backyard. Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
That's really bittersweet now that I've had a second chance to think about it, because we did discuss it in take one, but I mean, yeah, it kind of, the slow, so we've talked, not on the podcast, but just you and I, because we talk, about catastrophism and the idea that some extinctions, there seems to be evidence in the physical record that some extinctions kind of happened all at once due to a catastrophic event, like a tsunami wave or a sudden nuclear winter or something, similar to that. But this is like a long, drawn out, sad potential extinction happening, It
is sad. However, I would like to bring back the mammoths. So if you if you are working on mammoths, let's bring them back so that we can have more pawpaws and persimmons and although, gotta say, if a mammoth came tromping through the yard, it would probably mess up a lot of our stuff.
A lot of our stuff, yeah. The megafaunas,
Those berry bushes would be toast. So
yeah,
no rhizomes would help them then. So anyway, think twice about bringing back the mammoth.
Yes.
But plant your pawpaws. They do grow around here, and you can order seeds online.
You can also get plants at local native nurseries. We'll give a plug, unsolicited endorsement for Sugarbush up in Moton on Route 10.
Yeah, they sell pawpaws, and once you get them established, like you said, they'll put up their own little stand, and there's all kinds of interesting things that they do. And at the end, you get George Washington's favorite dessert, which is pawpaws and cream. So
all right,
that's all we have on our agenda for today.
Excellent. So thanks so much for listening. Again, this was Original Transplants Podcast, episode 6, take 2. We are Will and Sarah, the stewards of Satoyama Homestead. You can find us online at satoyamahs.org. You'll find this episode 6 of the Original Transplants, at spreadcast.tumblr.com, along with a transcript and show notes and references within the next few days. And you're listening to the audio through SoundCloud. Look for Satoyama Homestead and the Original Transplants set. Thanks for listening.
Thanks as always. Bye now.